Well, sister, as your bishop, it's my grave duty to, because of your sexual indiscretion, we're going to have to excommunicate you.
What? Does that mean I can't go to church anymore?
Oh, sister, heavens no. We're reasonable people, sister. In fact, you should come to church. All it means is that while you're at church, you can't say any prayers, you can't hold any callings, you can't really talk at all in class. We're gonna have to let all the teachers and most of the people know that you've been excommunicated so that they don't call on you. While you're at church, you can't partake the sacrament, so, everyone's gonna see that you're not taking the sacrament. But we're trying to get it to where you can just hate yourself back into God's loving arms.
Oh, thanks, Bishop.
Of course, sister. Anyway, you work on that. Read Miracle of Forgiveness. They'll teach you the right way to hate yourself, and we'll just see you next week.
Thank you.
Come in. Hey there, Bishop. Oh, well, hey there, Sister Jensen. So I just come by to confess. So I got all hopped up on the prescription oxys that I'm addicted to, and I told all my kids that I don't love them and never want to see them again. They're worthless pieces of crap. I was wondering if you could, get God to forgive me for that or something. Oh, Sister Jensen, we've been over this. That's not something you need to come to the bishop for. Oh, silly me. Bye-bye now.
Hey, what's up, guys? It's ex-mormon here with My Spiritual Life. I've got Jared, my husband, helping me out. And today we're going to talk about some interesting stuff. We are talking about public shaming within the church community, in addition to virtue signaling that goes on. You know what we're talking about. Those members that are like, look how awesome I am. Look how many times I go to the temple each week. Anyway, you get the idea. So, talking about the public shaming that happens within the church. Your sins are just often on display for everyone, even though that's not really technically what happens. It's what happens.
I mean, it's pretty much technically what happens. You're not allowed to take the sacrament. That's a small example even. People notice when you're not taking the sacrament, and when they see a 15-year-old boy not taking the sacrament,
everyone...
I wonder what he's doing. He probably just swore or something like that. No, he jerked off.
Okay, so to recap for people who may not have ever been Mormon, understand that there's certain sins within the church that your leader, your bishop will tell you you need to repent of, and in order to repent of those sins, you will be punished in a way that's unfortunately kind of visible for everyone else to see. So, for example, we have the 12 and between 12 and 18-year-olds are the ones that pass around the sacrament in the wards, the men, the young men. And for example, if one kid does something wrong, then he is forbidden from passing the sacrament. Well, everyone in the ward knows if someone who's normally passing the sacrament stops passing the sacrament, and then everyone just knows, oh, he did something. He did some kind of sin, which, of course, when it's a 14-year-old boy, we all know what that is.
Well, there aren't a lot of sins that they'll tell you to stop taking the sacrament for. Like most bishops, even if you drink alcohol, that's not even something you're supposed to really come to the bishop about. You can just take care of it on your own. But it's also important to know that the alternative to that sort of silent public shaming is to just lie.
Yeah.
Which messes you up inside.
If you believe in the church, then lying is going to make you feel very guilty. And especially if you're passing the sacrament, you're like, this bread is not blessed correctly. Like, all these people, I'm screwing it up for everyone.
Well, not only that, I was told that if you pass the sacrament unworthily, then all the sins of the congregation are heaped onto you.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!
I don't know if that has any... If that's ever been mentioned by an actual authority.
I'm sure it hasn't. But those kind of rumors go around when you're in the church that you believe is true and everything else is bad. And oh my gosh, that is so horribly damaging. I just want to give little Jared a hug.
So I just lied, and I never told a bishop about anything, which I think was the right move, but
Man.
I don't know. I guess lesser of two evils.
Oh, man. I remember my friend who was having bishop issues. To make it less awkward, he would just not wear a white shirt. Because a lot of bishops, I don't think it's doctrine, but a lot of bishops will say, like, you have to wear a white shirt in order to be worthy to pass the sacrament. So he'd wear a different colored shirt, which is, kind of taboo in Mormonism sometimes. But he'd wear a different colored shirt and be like, oh, well, I wore my purple shirt today, so I can't pass the sacrament, which I don't blame him. Like, it just is a sucky situation.
That's a nice life hack for teenage Mormon boys.
Life hack. Don't wear a white shirt. Unless you got one of those really progressive bishops that's like, oh, that purple shirt, you can still pass the sacrament. You're screwed. Oh, man. I think it just really bothers me in Christianity in general. This isn't the only church that offers this kind of recompense for, like, doing something wrong. This kind of recompense that's just so obvious to everyone else. Like, if someone's sitting outside the bishop's office, they're either getting a temple recommend or getting some money, or they sinned, and it's like, you can usually tell which one of the three it is.
Well, especially if they sit outside of the bishop's office consistently.
Yes, if they're sitting out there every week, then oh, they're working on a sin. Or if it's like your brother or something, like, oh, he didn't come home from church with us, he's meeting with the bishop. Well, he sinned, and it's one of those things that if I were to believe in, like, your sins have to be worked on or whatever, I would at least say that this should be a really personal thing. But it's not really personal. It's just very evident to everyone. And it just becomes this gossipy mess of like, oh, did you see who wasn't taking the sacrament last week? And it's just wrong. And I just feel like your spirituality should be very private. I don't feel like it should be on display for everyone, but it's on display in this church on the positive and the negative, right? Because everyone can see if you're going to the temple a lot or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like those, anyway, we'll get more into the other end of it, but
Mormonism has a weird obsession with sexual sin. I like the way that Catholics do confession. I think it's something that can be very therapeutic. It's kind of implied that just everyone needs to go to confession. From what I've heard, it's just nobody's perfect. You gotta. And I think it can be very cathartic for people to talk about ways they think they could improve.
Sure.
The problem is, in Mormonism, it's almost more bureaucratic.
It is.
It's like a technicality that you have to go through. And it's like paperwork for God, basically. But since they only do that with sexual sins, basically,
for the most part,
you always know what that person did. Right.
It's kind of creepy, right? Like if a lot of bishops don't care whether you drink alcohol or not, if that's something you can deal with on your own, then like it's almost creepy. Like, we only want to hear about the sex stuff. That's weird. I don't know. And I know some people would argue like, well, like those are the sins that are the worst. So that's why you need a bishop to take care of it. And I'm like, that's creepy. I don't get it.
Well, and they're very vague. They don't have degrees of sexual sin, really.
They're all just second to murder.
Yeah, so a 13-year-old boy jerking off, a guy raping a bunch of folks, both second to murder.
Well, and that's not even an exaggeration. This is taught within the Mormon Church that sexual sin is second to murder. That is actually taught.
That's
it's
a scripture.
Extremely damaging.
And I think if you asked any reasonable bishop, they'd say, well, no, obviously raping a bunch of people is worse than a 13-year-old jacking off, but
to what extent? There's no way to measure.
I don't know. I growing up, I was always under the impression that I was just as bad as a rapist.
Yeah, and then you had that whole, like, I'm sinning against the greater light, so I'm even worse.
Yeah.
Sinning against the greater light, meaning that, when you're a Mormon and you sin, it's an even bigger deal because you know better. Someone who doesn't know better, maybe they can get away with masturbating. Specifically when it comes to excommunication, this blows my mind, right? Because you have sinned, right? And in order to fix that sin, God is saying that you are being kicked out of the church. Because that's what excommunicated means. Your name is officially removed off the records. And to me, that is just ridiculous. Like, you're having a hard time. A lot of people who get excommunicated, yeah, they leave, whatever. But there's a lot of people that get excommunicated and they are very stalwart and they want to be a part of the church and they feel really bad. I feel bad for those people because their way of, this is how you have to work through your sin, is that you're excommunicated, so you can't do anything. You can go to church, you can sit there and you can listen, and that's it. You're not allowed to have a calling, which, first of all, that's funny, right?
Oh no!
You sinned, now you're not allowed to do service for the Lord. Like, oh darn, I don't have to plan lessons. That's funny. But second of all, you're not allowed to speak during class or pray. Like, your sin was so bad that God no longer wants to hear from you. That is ridiculous to me. And that is just so shaming to people that it makes me really frustrated, honestly.
Anybody with a calling, like with teaching or anything like that, you have to let them know when somebody's been excommunicated so they can know not to call on them or ask them. So everyone has to basically know that you've been excommunicated.
Yeah, because they're like, oh, this is between you and the bishop and the Lord. But it's not, because if someone calls on you to pray, you have to say, don't call on me to pray. So you have to tell them ahead of time so you don't make a fool of yourself in front of everyone. But then pretty much everyone needs to know so they don't ask you. It's a mess. I am not a fan of that at all. I feel like if you believe this is the true church and everything, like, I understand the concept of, like, when you sin, you have to try to make up for it somehow. I don't agree with it, but I understand if that's your line of thinking. But how is your way of making up for it not praying?
That is odd.
So they're allowed to pray outside of church, but still, it blows my mind. Like, I just do not get it. Like, it makes no sense. The other issue we wanted to talk about when it comes to this kind of public shaming is that punishments vary so much from bishop to bishop and ward to ward, state to state even, I've heard. And that is just unfair. 2 kids do the exact same thing, and their 2 bishops punish them differently. How is that fair? Like, it just doesn't make sense. And it's like, oh, well, the bishop's being told by the Spirit of the Lord which kid needs more punishment than the other. That's just crazy to me. That's a lot of faith to put in your bishop, that maybe he's not just really anti-porn. I had a friend that told me when he was 16 years old, his bishop put him through disciplinary counsel. Now that is, like, so serious, and they basically held excommunication over this kid's head. He's 16. You're not supposed to be able to be excommunicated until you even go through the temple. It's ridiculous. And they basically told him, like, that if he didn't start really making some drastic changes, that they were gonna excommunicate him. And it was just absurd to me, because a 16-year-old going through something like that, it's not even a church standard.
No.
So for him to go through that, it was very traumatic. Like, he felt terrible. And, oh man, it was just a mess. It just was not right at all.
And then you get guys that cheat on their wives and don't even get a disciplinary counsel. I've heard of that happening before too. It just varies a little too much. I don't usually like for a religion to be centralized all that much. But I think maybe one area where it can be centralized is punishment. I guess if there has to be punishment,
it's hard, because then what, do you have to map out every sexual sin there could possibly be and figure out where they fall on the spectrum? I don't know.
Or just don't make kids come in and tell random strangers what they've done sexually. I guess that would fix the problem.
That would fix the problem. That would be much better. It's just creepy and gross the more I think about it. And I'm just really glad that I actually had sincere leaders that weren't creeps. I mean, from what I know, I guess I don't know. Maybe they were. In closing about the public shaming for now, I just feel like your spirituality should just be between you and God, honestly. Like, I don't know. I don't see the need for a third party. I don't see how it helps. I don't get it. Because all the like, I mean, is there ever a good reason to have a third party? Not when you don't think the church is true, so it just doesn't make sense.
They take a good approach to other sins.
It's a pink hair.
Oh no. I can explain. They take a good approach to other types of sins, like, they tell you it's between you and God, right? And I'm not sure, it must have been the Puritan movement back in the day that got them so stuck on masturbation. If you think that's a sin, then pray, I guess. I don't know, and I don't know how to fix that.
I just don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's right to make things so apparent for everyone. I obviously, I don't think the church is true, so it's like, I'm not going to propose any solutions. Yeah, we're just going to move on. So now we want to talk about kind of the other end of the spectrum, and that's kind of this virtue signaling, or this like just making your holiness like just so obvious and apparent to everyone. Going to church, first of all, right? I think there's a lot of religions, it varies so much in the world, but I would say that the Mormon religion specifically, it's like you are completely judged upon how often you go to church or not. It's even a temple recommend question. So like you can't go to the temple if you're not, according to that, regularly attending your church meetings, right? I just think that there's a lot of people that go to church to show everyone else that they're going to church. And maybe they're not going for the right reasons. Now, not everyone, right? But I'm just saying that I think we get so caught up in what other people are thinking about us and what the judgment that would happen if we didn't show up to church, that we almost are going to get less out of it because we're just so busy trying to prove to everyone else how awesome we are. You following me?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't really have any beef with the church telling you to go to church more often, but where they really start sort of trying to signal how virtuous they are is with tithing is a big one. And they'll give talks about, they thought I couldn't afford to pay tithing. Well, it turns out I couldn't afford to not pay tithing.
I couldn't afford to not let my kids starve.
I've seen stories where they'll say it came down to paying rent or paying tithing, and they chose to pay tithing. And first off, I'm so good. I paid my tithing instead of rent. No, that's stupid. And then they didn't know what was going to happen. What? How am I going to make ends meet? And all of a sudden, my tax returns come in, and it's the exact amount to the penny that I needed for my rent. And if I hadn't paid my tithing, if you hadn't paid your tithing, what? Your tax returns wouldn't have come in. That was going to happen anyway.
Maybe someone would have stole their tax returns if they didn't pay their tithing.
If you hadn't paid your tithing, you would have your tax returns and your tithing money. You would have had 2 months' rent.
Oh my gosh.
To the penny.
I don't have issue with people wanting to pay tithing, but I have issue with people acting like they're going to pay tithing before they feed their kids or pay their rent. That is not smart. And guess what? God gave you a brain for a reason. Some of you just don't use it.
This is usually the part where I say, well, in the church's defense. But there's no defense here, really.
The church has so much money.
No. I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about, this isn't something that's just like, oh, it's the members, not the church. The church propagates that. As recently as 2 years ago, I think they had that talk where the guy glorified paying tithing before feeding your kids.
Oh, gosh. That makes me sick. Because guess what? That's not how God works. I always say Mormons are arrogant for saying how God works, but that's not how God works. The thing that really bothers me, too, with tithing in particular is that the church doesn't need your money. God doesn't need your money. This church is freaking so rich. And you are willing to not feed your kids so that this billion-dollar enterprise can have $60. Like, that's just ridiculous. And I know a lot of people, they're very sincere, like, oh, I want to do this because I want to show, like, God how much I care and stuff. And it's like, I get that. But you gotta realize that God would want you to feed your kid, right? I just feel like if God is cool, and I think he is, he would want you to feed your family. That's the cool thing to do. That's what the cool kids are doing these days.
What's what all you cool cats are up to now, eh?
Feeding our kids.
They also have changed tithing. Little side note. used to be, what was it, 10% of your increase or something?
Yes, it was.
And only when you could afford it?
It was 10% of your surplus.
Yeah.
Now, to backtrack, when tithing was initially started with the church, the way it was implemented was you feed your family, you take care of your bills, and then you have some leftover, right? You have $100 left over after paying all of your bills. 10% of that goes to the church. And then outside of that, if you want to donate more, you can. But now it's turned into this, it's 10% of your income.
Of your gross income. Well, it's up to interpretation, but a lot of people say gross income.
Yeah, so they'll go and calculate what taxes would have taken out, right? And then pay tithing on that. Oh. So the last issue, and I swear we'll stop talking about tithing. The last issue with tithing that I have is the tithing settlement. So each year, at the end of the year, the bishop invites all the families separately, like each family individually, to come and to say whether or not they have paid tithing. They will sit your whole family down and they will ask each member of the family, are you a full tithe payer? And all of you are sitting in front of each other. So it's a mom, a dad, their 3 kids. The bishop will ask every single one of them, are you a full tithe payer? And you can say yes or no. And you are expected to go to that.
Well, and it's not even like you can lie about it. They give you basically a receipt that shows the exact dollar amount that you have paid. So as a parent, you got your kids in front of you, and you've got to make sure that, I don't want to disappoint my kids. And as a kid, if you have a job at Burger King or whatever, and your parent is going to see, and they will generally know how much you've made. And they see, oh, you paid $20 in tithing. I know you've made more than $200. And
it's just awkward when you're sitting in front of your kids, if you felt like you couldn't afford it or whatever, you're sitting in front of your kids, you have, you're kind of guilted into saying yes, otherwise what are your kids going to think of you? It's just a mess. Plus, with tithing settlement, you have to sign up for it by signing up, the bishop will have this, sheet where you can sign up on the door. So you have to write your name on the door, your family's name. So everyone in the ward sees whose names are on that tithing settlement. So if your name's not on there, people know that you're, trying to get out of it. That you're not doing it. So again, it comes back to that virtue signaling thing. It's you can all see how holy each other are. And I just don't like that. I think this should be a personal thing. If you want to spend money and give it to God, I think that should be a personal thing. And yet, the bishop has to sit you down. There's no other sins that the bishop sits you down and asks you outside of a temple recommend if you're following other than tithing. He doesn't sit you down at the end of the year and ask if you're following the word of wisdom. He doesn't sit you down and ask if you're obeying the Sabbath, keeping it holy. He only sits you down and asks you if you're giving him the money.
Yeah, you bring that cheddar? That Jesus' money, yo.
Oh my gosh, that concept of it's not even your money, it's God's money. He let you keep 90%.
Well, if I can't earn anything, I might as well just not work at all anyway. There's no point. If it's God's money, then...
There's no point to work. Another virtue signaling thing. Now, I'll just briefly talk on it. It's the Come Follow Me program. Now, we haven't been going to church this year, so I don't know how this has landed exactly. But my understanding is that the change in the format this year has been that there's certain lessons you're supposed to do ahead of time so that when you're at church, they're going to ask you about what did you learn about? And it's supposed to be the whole family. They're going to ask the kids, they're going to ask the adults. And I imagine that can make some people feel very awkward, especially a kid, if their parents didn't go over the lesson with them, that can make that kid feel bad when it's not that kid's fault.
So wait a minute. They got rid of an hour of church, but then gave you homework?
Yes, that's exactly what they did.
Oh, that hardly seems worth it.
Oh my gosh, no, and it's you know what? The general authorities were so smart. They figured this out. They said the best conversion comes from inside the home, right? Smart. So they said, so make them study at home more. That's what they said. Smart. But the thing that bothers me about that is I think that it can make those who maybe don't have time or whatever, or had, you got a life, you got a billion things the church expects you to do, and then you're supposed to also do your church homework, and then if you don't do it, I feel like that could make you feel awkward in front of everyone in the class. Now, I haven't been there, I don't know if that's the way that it's being presented, but that was my understanding of it, so sorry if we're getting that wrong. Another virtue signaling thing is the ministering, which originally used to be called visiting teaching and home teaching, and they changed the name to ministering. And what that is basically each member of the ward, the adults, are assigned to go visit other adults in the ward, like buddy system. Everyone checks in on everyone else, right?
Your assigned friendships.
It's exactly that. It's your assigned friendships. And now, the virtue signaling that happens with this is that not only do you have an assigned friendship, but you have someone who's assigned to ask you if you checked in with your assigned friend. It's like a 3rd grade field trip going on here. I don't know.
It's like when they make you pair off in school and you don't have a friend in that class and you're the last one left and they just stick you with the other weird kid or with the teacher or whatever. It's like that, but they just stick everyone wherever they want. You don't get to choose. And honestly, that one could fit into both categories, because if you're not doing your ministering, then there are at least 2 families in your ward that know that you're not fulfilling your calling, and plus the bishop and the elders quorum president, whoever else is in charge of knowing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're gonna know that you're not doing it. Buddy system, it's important. The holiest of holy ways to virtue signal to everyone is about your temple attendance, because it's not required. It's just what the holiest people do.
It's not that you're told to go to the temple. It's that you're voluntold to go to the temple.
Voluntold. I like that. That makes sense. Voluntold.
These could all kind of fit under sort of the larger category of when you give talks, right? Because it's when people give talks that they do most of their virtue signaling, right? It's people talking about like the blessings of the temple, or how they were on their last dollar but they gave it to God and it worked out anyway. So it's a way to simultaneously fulfill the calling of giving your talk and show people how great you are.
That's true.
And it's also just, people say they'll work it. A lot of those people will work it into conversations where it really doesn't make sense. Yeah. Oh, bless you. Yeah, not as much of a blessing as going to the temple twice a week like I've been doing, but yes. Bless me.
Oh my God!
It's funny you should bring up blessings, though, because I have a lot of them. Probably because I pay my tithing.
Do you remember that guy we were hanging out with a couple weeks ago? And he just kept talking about how he takes his son to the temple every single week. It just feels like there's no other reason to just like randomly bring that up other than to be like, look how awesome I am. And it's like, if you're awesome, that's great, but it feels so braggy and so arrogant to be like, oh, you're probably not going to the temple every week, but I am.
I don't mind if people talk about it, but with him it was like, he's like, what have you guys been up to? Like, oh, just working. And he's like, yeah, I've just been going to the temple a lot with my kid, bringing him. Mostly the temple, yeah. You guys been at work? How's work? Oh, it's pretty good. The temple's pretty great, too.
That's seriously exactly how the conversation went, though. I'm not even kidding. No, I'm not even kidding. He just kept bringing it back to how he goes to the temple a lot. Which, again, I'm fine if you like the temple. I really liked the temple. I still think it's cool. Like, parts of it, some of it, whatever,
It's boring.
Again, I think in Mormonism, you fall into this getting caught up in the details where you're trying so hard to do all these little nuances that are going to make you really holy and to hide all the bad parts of things that you're doing. And you get so caught up in all those little things that you can't really worship God real easily or effectively or feel like you're having a good connection. Yeah, what he said. Whenever Jared is silent to one of my responses, I think he either agrees with me so much he has nothing to add, or he disagrees so readily that he can't even fathom what he could say to that.
I'll be honest, I just spaced out, so I don't know if I agreed or not.
Moral of the story today, I think that Mormons would have a much better time in their worship if they just tried a little less to worry about what everyone else thought about them. And that would be easier to do if their sins weren't put on display for everyone. And in addition, people weren't checking up on them to make sure that they were following the God's commandments to check in with your buddy and pay all your money. Well, Bishop, I guess I won't be coming to Tithing Settlement next week since I'm technically not even a member anymore.
Oh, sister, heavens no. You still come to Tithing Settlement because God still gets his.
Thank you guys so much for watching this video today. Please, if you'd like to support us, give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, and comment below some of the cringy ways that you virtue signaled while you were a Mormon. And we will see you guys in the next video.